Welcome to Books Are Good Medicine, a podcast sponsored by the Shakopee, Madawakan, and Sioux community, featuring books and other Native American-focused teaching resources. We are your hosts, Odia Krieger
and Allison Waka. Today's Classroom Essentials episode is all about Indigenous Peoples Day and how educators can recognize this day in schools.
Our guest today is Katrina Phillips, who is an associate professor of history at Macalester College. Her teaching focuses on Native history and the history of the American West. Born and raised in northern Wisconsin, she is a proud citizen of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe.
In addition to her academic work, Katrina is a public historian and serves as a historical and cultural consultant for books on Native people and topics. Her work has appeared in Made by History section of the Washington Post, and she's been quoted in the New York Times, the Associated Press, and Indian Country Today.
Katrina has also written several children's books, including one titled Indigenous Peoples Day. And just last year, she revised the Indigenous Peoples History module for Capstone's Pebble Go Next.
In this episode, we talk with Katrina all about Indigenous Peoples Day, which is coming up this fall on Monday, October 14th. She shares great resources for teaching about the day and celebrating it in classrooms. Enjoy.
Well, good afternoon, Katie. We are so excited to have you here. Welcome to Books Are Good Medicine. And I want to first start off, when we introduced this podcast, we said Katrina. I just said Katie because in our dialogue, you said you prefer Katie. I am curious, though, about, do we use Dr. Phillips? When is the doctor?
Dr. Katie. Well, Allison has always called me Dr. Katie, which I kind of love. But yeah, and it's something that I'm really proud of. I always ask my students, they either call me Dr. Phillips or Professor Phillips, just because there aren't a whole lot of professors who look like me, and I'm very proud of the work I did to get those letters, after my name. But please just call me Katie. I use Katrina professionally, but everybody just calls me Katie. So
I know Dr. Kate Bean,
Yes.
she talks a lot about how people tend to minimize the accomplishments of women, and then especially Native women. So I wanted our listeners to make sure to address you in the preferred way, even though we get to be a little more casual with you. So I appreciate that. So we brought you here today to talk about Indigenous Peoples Day. And for folks who don't know, Katie is the author of this book, and we'll hopefully get to talk about some of your others. But Indigenous Peoples Day is kind of a mystery to some folks, which is surprising. And so I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about that. But first, I should probably check in with you about where you said that there aren't a lot of me. What is your academic journey and how did you get there?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So I am from very rural northern Wisconsin, and I always tell people, however many people you think live in rural northern Wisconsin, cut that in half and like triple the number of cows. All right. So it's like very, very rural. But, I loved where I grew up. My parents are still there. And as a kid in rural northern Wisconsin, there's kind of a limited sense as to what you can be when you grow up. My parents, encouraged me in every little avenue I tried. I danced forever. I did a lot of community theater. I did all of that stuff. But I always loved history. My dad is a retired high school English teacher. We read all the time. We read everything. And I always loved it, but I didn't know that it was a career path.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got to college and I started taking history courses to fill my schedule.
Yeah.
Because they were 4 credits at the U of M and I needed to be a full-time student. And I just remember being like, oh my God, this is something I could do. I, like I said, grew up reading. I loved writing, loved all of these pieces of it. And then taking history courses and getting a chance to really see that was a possibility. And so I called my parents. This was somewhat later in my undergrad, I called my parents and I said, so what if I changed my major to history? And as always, my parents said, whatever you want to do, we will support you. And so I ended up as a history major, finished the history major. And then, because why not, I said, well, if I want to be a professor, I need a PhD. And so got my PhD. And I mean, I had like one kid
make it
before.
sound so easy. Just
PhD. I should probably note I had one kid in grad school and then had another one right before I started on the tenure track.
Oh my goodness.
That was added probably some gray hairs to that, but
Beautiful boys.
Beautiful boys. Thank you. Problem is they know it. So, but it's been a really wonderful journey, and I love being in academia. I love that whole environment. But as Allison knows, with now having kids in public school system, having Native kids in the public school system, having the chance to do this kind of work, a lot more public facing work with children's books and helping in their schools and helping in other environments has become a really special and a really important part of the work that I do.
Yeah,
So-
can be somewhat demoralizing. Like looking at some curricula, like I've done that before when I worked with Minneapolis Public Schools. I don't know if you were involved in the curriculum review, but you know that you have several companies and you have to do a review. And the whole time you're like, oh my God, I can't let this go through. I can't let this go through. And you realize all your choices are pretty terrifying. Yeah. And then when you start going through things, you're like, oh my goodness, if I flag everything about Native people, then I've whitewashed the curriculum. So I can't do that. So then you create this weird ranking of like, this is bad, but it's not egregious. And so you have like this weird negotiation with yourself about like, oh, can I let this go through to the next printing? And so hats off to you for jumping in there and taking the bull by the horns.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I'm so grateful for the work that you do as well with curriculum development, all of, the advocacy work that you do as well, because this is the kind of stuff that I never knew growing up. And, my parents bought so many books just for me to be able to see myself reflected in something somewhere. And now to be able to give not only my kids, but their friends, their classmates, an opportunity to see this kind of history, to see someone, well, for my boys, to see themselves represented in books, but then also for their friends and classmates to see kids in books that don't look like them.
Right.
And so it's wonderful work. I feel really fulfilled by it. But also, like you said, it's at some point it's kind of terrifying because it's like I approach every book thinking, what if this is the only book about Native people, Native history, Indigenous Peoples Day that a kid ever picks up? And so whether it's work that I'm writing or and I do a lot of consulting work as well. And so when I do consulting work too, I look at it through the lens of, if I'm a kid and this is the only book I'm ever going to stumble across, it better be good. It better be accurate, right? With the portrayals of the people, of the histories of these stories, it needs to be at the level that we as Native people deserve to have it be.
That's awesome, because I feel like there's this conversation with librarians or in libraries, do we need, do the books need to be accurate in regarding Natives, right? Or can it be fiction, and can it have, and I always, it's such a conflict, right? And because I feel like libraries should be a place where knowledge is accurate, right? If anything. And so how do we navigate that with Native books? And because the thing is knowledge is power, right? And creating that these accurate Native books have the power to create allyship and create representation. And so what you're doing is really powerful. And so thank you for all this work. It's the Indigenous Peoples Day book is wonderful because I think it covers, it's not just the United States, it covers worldwide, right? And then it gives, and I do like the part where you don't start off with Columbus, right? You get a little in, and then you
that guy.
yeah.
Oh, him.
But I really like. Was that intentional then when you were writing? Like,
It was, and so Indigenous Peoples Day is the first children's book I ever wrote.
yeah.
And I had done some consulting work for Capstone over a number of years. And they have this Traditions and Celebrations series. And they said, we'd love for you to write a book about Indigenous Peoples Day. And I said, oh my God, yes. And then I went, oh my God, what did I just agree to do?
Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, no.
Right. And how do I write about this for kids?
Right.
And I do have to give a lot of credit to my colleagues to my friends and colleagues at the University of Minnesota, because we have a workshop there. It's called the American Indian and Indigenous Studies Workshop, run by my graduate school advisor, Dr. Jean O'Brien. And it's just a really wonderful environment where we quite literally workshop anything.
Oh, awesome.
And I miraculously had a slot in workshop, and I thought to myself, I can't write this book without getting the insights of, these brilliant people that I'm lucky enough to work with. And they were so fantastic and so supportive and gave me great feedback. And with a book like Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'm finding that with a lot of the other history books that I'm writing as well, is how do we tell this history to kids? And by starting with what Indigenous Peoples Day is, I really wanted to foreground Native people.
Yes.
And really be able to start off with that. And I mean, the photo they chose for the cover is just, they're amazing, right? The kind of work that they do. And what's been so wonderful about this book has been the response to it. I had, one of my cousins bought the book and sent it to her daughter's media specialist, who then recorded herself reading the book, because this was during COVID.
Oh, sure.
Recorded herself reading it and then sent it out to all the teachers.
Oh.
I've had, friends I went to elementary school with who are now librarians.
Who I love it.
Right?
Yeah.
Who have put the book in their library. And, I've had friends in Montana who bought the book. And it's just been really humbling in a really beautiful way, because you didn't grow up with these kinds of books. And I think for parents, for educators, and, for consultants, we need those materials, and thinking about teachers, giving them a way to engage with this history in a way that kids are going to understand.
Right.
So,
right. And I think it creates confidence. I think that's one of the things that we hear most from educators, is that they're just, with Native curriculum, fearful of doing the wrong thing or whatever. And so this book is a great resource for that. And we are lucky enough to live in Minnesota, where Indigenous Peoples Day is recognized, but in a lot of states it's not. And so creating that awareness across the board for Indigenous peoples. I remember in college it was a big conversation, about
When were you in college? You don't want to tell me.
Yeah, it was a while ago, but I remember I was at Fort Lewis, and a lot of us were, I think I never really thought of replacing Columbus. I just kind of accepted, it's going to be Columbus Day, and I would always feel crappy on the day, and somehow not seen. And then I was like, oh, there is change. There can be change. And it just makes me just feel so excited for the next generation and the future.
I just don't even think about Columbus Day because I'm Canadian. So that's Canadian Thanksgiving. And so for me, it was always like, so in conversation, I'll always say to people like, oh, on American Thanksgiving, they always look at me like I've grown horns because, or thanks taking, anyway, I always preface it with American because I was like, I got my own and it's, the second Monday. But so for folks who are thinking about this, I like to brag about Minneapolis. So we had our first Indigenous Peoples Day acknowledged back in 2014. But then President Biden, he had a presidential proclamation in 2021, first president to do so, and then has done it ever since. And it is not a federally recognized holiday.
Yet.
But we would love for it to be. Some of the things that I see happen in schools, anytime it's an Indigenous type holiday, they're like, who's Native in our community that can pick this up and do it? So I'm curious, what advice, subtle whoop ass do you have for schools to be like, this is how you incorporate it, or these are some protocols you should think about as you ask people to do it? What do you wish schools would think about as they move forward?
I just have to laugh when you said subtle because I just can't be subtle. I try very hard and it just fails. But I think with this kind of work, I think it goes two different ways because when folks do reach out to me, I've been very lucky in the fact that they have essentially started their conversation with, I know we ask you for a lot, but we would really love some advice. And so I think recognizing, and it's always funny, right? Because it's like, we've got Indigenous Peoples Day in October, November is Native American Heritage Month, and here we have May as, American Indian Month in Minnesota. And so I would say if you're going to reach out to somebody, do it sooner rather than later. But as far as, practical things, I was going to make a joke and say, buy the book.
We think that's a great idea.
Step one. Yeah. But I think it's easier said than done. But I think for educators and for schools, it's being willing to have these conversations is a fantastic first step. Being willing to have a book like this, being willing to have those conversations with students, with teachers, and, for administrators, supporting their teachers. And thinking about, and now we're so lucky. We have so many fantastic books by Native authors that, we can really have these conversations all year long.
Right.
And that's another thing that's big too, where it's like, it's not just, second Monday in October. Yeah. It's not just the month of November. These are conversations we should have all year long. And the schools where my boys are at, they have always been amazing. They have always been, and it's a smaller district. And so, word will kind of get around like, oh, email Leo's mom, or
don't screw up. Leo's mom is not subtle.
Be like, oh, sorry, you have the Phillips boys. Their mom is something else. No, but yeah, and I reach out to their teachers I give them like the first couple weeks of September to get everything acclimated, right? Yeah. And I'll email and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I do. Indigenous Peoples Day is coming up. Do you mind if I send some books in, like the week ahead of time so you can kind of get a sense, see what you'd like to do? I've helped facilitate, crafts and things like that, which have been really amazing. And it's been such a cool opportunity. Like even before this book came out, my older one, it would have been fall of 2020 because he was learning at home, like in our kitchen. And he was, on his little screen and it's Columbus Day. And I hear his teacher say, all right, it's Columbus Day. What can you tell us about that? And I'm working in one spot. My husband's working in the other. And we hear our kids' teacher. My husband was like, just don't. He's like, just wait. Breathe. He's like, take a deep breath. And our kid like shoots his hand up and his teacher calls on him. And the first thing my kid says is, well, Columbus didn't really discover anything because there were already people here. And I heard this little voice from like another computer, because, like they're all on Zoom or whatever. Yeah. I hear this other little voice go, he didn't discover anything. And I will never forget that. One, because it was my kid and what else you're going to do? But because of the way his teacher responded, that's not at all what she was expecting. Yeah. But she said, you're right. And so we have to think about, and, went on kind of this beautiful tangent. And it just felt,
yay for teachable moments.
Right, teachable moments. And, and then the book came out. And that year my kids were, God, everybody's getting so old. They were going into kindergarten and third grade.
Baby.
And so, had talked to their teachers, had sent the books in. And I tried to play it cool all day, like dropped them off at school. And the whole day I'm like, I wonder how, first in line at pickup. And they get in the car and I was like, so how was your day? And the older one was like, it was awesome.
Oh.
And, his teacher had read the book. They, she had done a really fantastic job, preparing for the day. Apparently they were asking my kid, like, what's it like to be Native? And he was like, it's pretty cool. And our little one gets in the car and he had a little bit of a lisp when he was little bitty. And I said, how was your day? And he goes, it was good. My teacher read us the book you wrote about, and like, you think about a kindergartner with a lisp trying to say Indigenous. And so there is a pause and he goes, the kind of people that we are.
Oh.
And it like, when your heart just like explodes from joy and pride, that's exactly what it was, because it was like, even as a kindergartner, that's the response he was getting.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
It's been amazing. And having a book like this that my kids can take to school, that my cousins' kids can take to school, my friends' kids can take to school, has been kind of the turning point that I didn't know I needed as far as advocacy work at this level. So,
well, and so many teachers are like, oh, I don't want to get it wrong, or I don't. Like, Darlene St. Clair always says, she calls them trapdoors, and I love that. Like, there's always these trapdoors people have, like, oh, I don't know, or, oh, I don't have the books. And then they get the books, and then they're like, oh, I don't know how to use them. There's all these little things, these trapdoors. But I hope that if teachers take anything away from this, the story of your two kids and the feelings, the internalized pride that they have for being recognized. And that's, what we want people to be able to generate in their classroom, have our kids be seen and feel valued, and that they, their life experience and their traditional knowledge is valuable and worthwhile to share. So you mentioned October, November, and May. Can you explain to folks what those things are? Why you mentioned those three, what the difference is? So when people are like, hang on, wait, what? So that they can sort of wrap their heads around it.
So with October, we have Indigenous Peoples Day, which I loved getting to learn about as I was doing this, because it's like I went to the first one in 2014 and was like, this is awesome, but didn't realize that it started in Berkeley in 1992. Nothing significant about the year 1992. Right? And so there's that. November is Native American Heritage Month, which I don't know if it's a federal.
It is federal.
It is federal. Okay.
Yeah, it's federal.
Okay. And so with that, I look at it as a chance to kind of do this kind of work that entire month. I always kind of, I don't know if giggle is the right word, because I don't do that very often, But, think about kind of the irony with the fact that it's the same month as Thanksgiving. I'm assuming that was intentional.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I would think so.
As kind of a response to.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Also the election now.
Oh,
right? So
Right.
it's like that time of year it's fraught with a lot of complexity.
And what I love about thinking about Native activism and advocacy, not only what led to Indigenous Peoples Day and Native American Heritage Month, but also all of these other celebrations that we have. And I talk about a couple of them in the book because I wanted to show that it's not just a day. And, November isn't just a month, that we really do have these opportunities. I mean, these are great opportunities to start.
Right.
But these shouldn't be our only ones.
Right.
Right. One day out of 365 isn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
And then with May, probably going to rely on you a little bit here.
Yeah.
I just know that it's American Indian Month in Minnesota.
Yep. And so American Indian movement started it even before Native Heritage Month was recognized. And so here they pushed for, and it has a kind of a convoluted history, but I think it was the city of Minneapolis that started it, and then it progressed into the state. And so I feel like May is more about our communities celebrating us, and then November is more about spreading awareness and education and so forth. So May, there's a lot of open houses and feasts and just get-togethers within, especially in the Twin Cities, and so a lot of food in May, I feel like. And
that was joke. Like, how many times do you eat at home in May?
Right.
You don't really eat a lot at home.
Yeah, we're very lucky in the month of May to have, and we're really lucky to have so many different Native caterers here and Native organizations, and so yeah, May is a good month, and so thankful that AIM started that.
And it should be noted that all of those celebrations that happen in May are open and available and free of charge for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So you also have some other books.
Yes,
that
do.
I asked you if you'd bring them. Do you want to?
I didn't even know about these, so I feel like
I'm really terrible at self-promotion. My husband is like, why don't you tell people about this? And I'm like, I post about it on Facebook. And he's like, oh my God.
You need a PR person.
I do need a PR person.
Yeah. So you have a lot of amazing books. So this one is...
So this is a graphic novel, and it's another series from Capstone. And so it's called The Disastrous Wrangell Island Expedition, which is a fantastic title.
Yes,
I did not come up with that, but I love it. And so there was this dude who was like, he essentially wanted to prove that people could survive like anywhere.
Okay.
And so he sends these dudes to this really remote island called Wrangell Island.
Okay.
And just like everything that could go wrong goes wrong.
Okay.
They're supposed to buy, X amount of things. They can't afford to buy all of the things because as they get farther and farther north, things get more expensive.
Oh, sure.
Very expensive.
They were supposed to get a whole bunch of, First Nations, Native people, Alaska Natives to go with to help, men would help hunt, women would help doing all of the things Native women do. And nobody wanted to go.
Oh,
There was this one woman named Ada Blackjack. And the only reason she went on the expedition is because her son was sick and she could not afford to pay for his care.
Oh.
And so they're sent out, they take the ship out to the island. It ends up where it's been a while since I read my book, but I think three of the four men go off to try to find help because the ship that was supposed to like resupply them didn't make it.
Geez. Okay.
Because there was too much ice. They couldn't get there. So the three men go off and they are literally never seen again.
It's like a reality TV series.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and this was in the I think it was 1920s, but like literally no trace of them has ever been found. And then, so the only two left at camp are Ada Blackjack and then one of the other men, and he doesn't go because he's too sick.
Oh.
I'm with something, like scurvy, something that is just like such an awful way to go.
Mm.
And so, and Ada had grown up in boarding schools and she didn't know a lot of the traditional means of sustenance. And so she ends up teaching herself how to hunt and fish. And she does all of these incredible things, keeps this man alive for longer than he would have survived on his own. But then he also finally passes away. And when the ship finally comes, I think 2 years later,
Oh my goodness.
she is the only survivor.
Oh my goodness.
So we had Deborah Magpie Erling on earlier, and she was talking, we were talking to her about Lost Journals of Sacagawea. Do you remember when she was talking about like all these things that go wrong? And she was like, why didn't they listen? Like there were all of these hints, right? Like when none of the First Nations people or Inuit want to go, like how was that not a clue that maybe this was a terrible idea?
And because they knew the island, they knew where it was, they knew what it was like to try to live there. But when you're the hubris of it is really striking. And so unfortunately, Ada's life she just had a very hard life. Accusations were thrown at her about, what happened on the expedition. She never received the payment she was promised.
Oh, of course.
Of course. But one of her sons ended up being a fantastic advocate for his mother. And so I think it was maybe the 1970s that her name and her story kind of came back. And so now she's more celebrated, she's more recognized, she's more honored. And so that was an interesting experience because it was a graphic novel.
Yeah.
And so thinking about how do I tell this like fantastic illustrator what to draw? And so going back and looking at my script, it's like, it'd be cool if there were a bunch of like seals and polar bears and stuff like on this. But I mean, it turned out really well. And
kids now really love graphic novels. I have to say,
they do.
It's a whole thing now more so than I could ever have imagined. So,
yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
My younger one likes to take this one out of the library at school, even though we have it at home.
Oh.
He just likes to check it out.
There is something to say about circulation. I will jump in and say that it is very good to get those native books checked out. So good job.
He is very much my little hype man. So
You should teach him some other PR skills.
there we go. I do suck at them. Yeah.
I'll take this one from you.
Well, maybe I need to be a little more aware too, but then
My in-house.
Right?
Well, we are happy to promote here. And how about this one?
So this one was also a lot of fun to get to work on. So this is part of a whole series that Scholastic does called Super She-Ros of History. And as a mom of two boys, I was like, yes, with Ada Blackjack. And then with this one, I was like, this is fantastic.
Does Ada appear in this one?
No, she is not in this one.
Okay.
But I worked with, again, a really great editor. I came up with a whole list, probably too long of a list, because then they were like, oh my God, like it's a short book. We can't do
Well, I always like people are like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, I'm not sure you'll be able to do a whole book. Like that's typically what it is. People are always like, could you come up with enough names? And then you're always like, yeah, I got this.
Yeah. And so I really love how they set these books up. So there are a couple chapters where there are, more in depth, they're longer biographies and things like that. And then a couple shorter ones throughout. And it was really awesome because I was able to pull in some women who weren't quite as well known.
Yeah, I'm loving these names. So
yeah.
Mary Ross.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. This is very cool.
Yeah, that was also really cool just because obviously Scholastic is a different imprint, thinking about kind of the reach and the scope of projects like this. So to be able to put I put Maud Keg in there.
Nice.
Because I was like, well, I need somebody from Minnesota. And so I was like, I could put this incredible artist in there. And so, yeah, it's just been really cool. And they have in the series, there are scientists, there are, all of these great women. And so the fact that they have this whole series celebrating women and that I got to do one on Native women was it was so cool.
So cool. Awesome.
Is this one currently available?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So the first 3 have already come out.
And these 2 are coming.
And these are some of the ones that are coming out. Yes.
So,
so this is Indigenous Environmentalism. This is one of 4 that I got to write for Learner.
We love Learner here.
Yeah.
Good, because I just signed on to do. I feel like I'm bragging. I feel like
you're definitely not bragging.
No, we love it.
Where I'm going to do a series of 8 biographies. And so I've picked, and again, worked in consultation with a great editor. So I'll have 4 men and 4 women. I've got Red Cloud in there. I have Maria Tallchief, which as a former ballerina makes my heart happy. Yeah, you too?
Yeah.
It's amazing. But yeah, and
oh my goodness.
So,
I'm so happy for you.
I have a lot of work to do.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And
so
please.
Thrilled. But when do they come out?
Well, I haven't written them yet.
Well,
so I think fall 25.
Okay. So we'll have to have you back on.
Yeah,
okay.
definitely.
For fall of, to have all of them, and we're excited.
And just set them up and.
Oh, yeah.
And I can just see the book display of all the books. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And all of the covers for this Learner series here with Indigenous Environmentalism, they did such a great job with it. And it's just been a fantastic experience with all of these different companies, all of these different editors, because I'm finding that they also recognize the importance of making sure, and I'm sure every time they get an email from me, they'll send me a layout and they're like, oh God, here we go. Because they'll be like, ooh, I want to change this word to here. And because again, it's really important. Words are so important.
Yes.
And so with this Indigenous Environmentalism one, I was going to say it's really cool, but I wrote it. So of course I think it's cool, but it's been really incredible to get the chance to do this kind of historical work.
Yes.
And to be able to talk about, in this book, I talk about the Dakota Access Pipeline, but also talking about the history behind it. And with the other books in this series, so there's one on language revitalization. So I talk about, all of the code talkers and, moving up to language immersion schools and things like that. There's one on Native hunting and fishing rights. So I'm talking about.
Ooh, that's going to be a hot topic.
Can you teach the kids the word usufructory? I still think that is the greatest word.
It is a fantastic word. I think it's probably in there once and then bolded and put in the glossary.
So excited. I'm such a word nerd.
And then there's one on water rights.
Fantastic.
And again, what I love about being a historian is, God, that's the nerdiest sentence I've probably ever said. But because it helps people understand what's happening today.
Yeah.
And context is so important. When we're thinking about contemporary activism and advocacy movements, why is this happening now? Right. And so with books like Hunting and Fishing, obviously I get to talk about the fish wars in the Pacific Northwest, but I also talk about what happened on my reservation in the 1960s and thinking about why it matters that we're doing this kind of work.
I am on Indigenous land. I love this one.
So this one's, January 2025, this comes out. Tell us a little bit about this.
So I'm proud of all of my books, but this is kind of a new direction.
Yeah.
And so I came onto this project a little bit later. I'd been a consultant on it. And then they asked if I could do the text for it. And so fangirl moment for the beautiful artwork of Sam Zimmerman, right? Who had done all of these amazing, really beautiful and vibrant depictions of just different places around North America. And so again, as a historian, I couldn't help it, but I talked about, there's a spread in there about the Seminole people. And so I talked about the Everglades. There's, thinking about Tuscarora land, thinking about Post Miwok land, Lakota, Blackfeet, Ojibwe lands, but really wanting to showcase just the depth and the breadth of Native peoples and Native histories. And when I wrote this draft, I had put a footnote at the end of every kind of, it's not rhyming, it's not anything like that, but it's like very much a picture book, things like that. But I had done kind of a footnote for every one to explain, because the one that I did for Ojibwe people is the snowshoe one. And so I wrote just a little thing about, what snowshoes are and why they're important and why Ojibwe people use them. And again, Capstone was fantastic with this. And they kind of shifted a couple of things around so they could put all of my little notes into the book. And again, being able to pull the history in, being able to add a little bit more of the context. I mean, little kids who pick up this book probably aren't going to read that, but whether it's their parents, grandparents, teachers, friends, relatives, whoever, it's also a chance to be able to draw from that as well.
And create conversation.
Right. And, we've got a really cool map in there that shows, kind of all of these different locations. When you were looking at it before, and he's got the water slide one in there.
Oh, yeah.
And you were like, oh, that's super tradish. But what I loved about that one is that, so I have some cousins who are Ho-Chunk, and, thinking about the Wisconsin Dells and all of, like, the Ho-Chunk have a huge tourism industry on their own, not, partly tied to the Wisconsin Dells and things like that. And so with that, I was like, well, this is a slam dunk. I can, honor my cousins. I can talk about tourism. I can talk about, Native economies, like all in one pretty picture. So.
And Native people do ride water slides.
We do enjoy water
Yes,
slides.
drive in cars and live in houses.
It's beautiful. And I'm so happy and proud to have met you all those years ago. And now our worlds are coming. She was on the library American Indian Advisory Council that I created.
Fantastic.
Or we created many years ago. And now we get to talk about your books. It's so cool. I just love the universe bringing us together and just seeing all that I had no idea about. So this makes me super happy. I had when we were chatting about doing Indigenous Peoples Day, I was like, I know who to talk to. I just know the person. And so just thank you for your work and being that advocate and getting us some books to read in classrooms. Thank you.
And thank you. And it's, again, like seeing the work that both of you do in your day-to-day life and then coming together to do this. Like I was talking to my mom this morning. I was like, well, I kind of have to hurry. Like I have a podcast interview. And she was like, she got super excited, like super proud mom. And she said, what's it called? And I said, Books Are Good Medicine. And she just goes, oh, and so it's like, to know that the work you're doing here too is, really resonating, and having the platform to be able to offer these resources, like the episode you did about when you all brought in like 75.
Oh my God. Well, this is our fun.
We laughed so hard. I was like, whose dumb idea was it to ask two bibliophiles to like bring in 10 books? I rolled a suitcase in.
She totally did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
This is so much fun for us, bringing our love of books and education and our nativeness together. And so, yeah.
We're grateful because Shakopee is who's funding this as part of the Understand Native Minnesota campaign that has since sunsetted. But the funds to do this project come as a result of that. And of course, that's a narrative change campaign. And so I think about the work you're doing with narrative change and both academic and in your writing as sort of a final thought before we say goodbye to you is what would you like teachers, what items do you think teachers need to know about Native people, or what advice do you have for them moving forward?
I think the biggest thing, it's so simplistic, but it has always been what I just immediately go to is reminding their students that Native people still exist. And reminding students that, whether you're seeing books or, movies or television shows and things like that, really getting students to understand not only Native pasts, but Native presents and then Native futures.
Does that hurt you as a historian to say?
No, it doesn't. As I'm like twitching, as I'm like, future? I'm more comfortable in the past. But yeah, and I think showing students, Native joy, showing, Native art and music and dance and all of these different things. And obviously being cognizant of and recognizing that it's a very difficult history. And I think that's why a lot of educators probably struggle with it, right? Because it's like how we can't keep this celebratory narrative of American history going when you look at Native history, when you look at, Latinx history, when you look at Black history, when you look at Asian American history. But for me, it's showing, whether it's readers, whether it's my own students in a college classroom, the joy of not only resistance, but of survival.
We are still here.
We are still here.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Allison, for introducing me to Katie. She's awesome. And I can't believe we didn't. Yeah, I can't believe. And so I know our listeners are going to be very excited and equal fan people over you. So we have 5 copies that we will have you sign, and we'll be able to send those out to listeners.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for joining us today. And I wish that we could talk to you all afternoon about narrative change and weird gatherings and all sorts of things.
Yeah, 2025.
But if we have our crystal ball, I would guess that we need to have you back at some point after you've done just a boatload of
writing.
Work, and just thrilled to see where you're headed next.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Books Are Good Medicine. Subscribe to our channel on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also visit our website, booksaregoodmedicine.com, to find episodes and resources, or to send us a comment. This podcast is sponsored by the Shakopee, Metawakan Sioux community and produced by Golf Public. Our theme song is Stomp Dance by Blue Dog. The opinions expressed on the Books Are Good Medicine podcast by its co-hosts and guests are their own in their personal capacities and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization with whom they are affiliated or with the podcast's sponsor.